there are two authors I need to thank. Bruce Orr for his book 6 Miles to Charleston. Bruce is a great guy and a tour guide in Charleston. And David C. Scott for his amazing book Abode of Misery, which is basically the Bible for Old City jail history. Messengers for the Devil. The Old City Jail is said to be haunted by an infamous woman in white, whom many regard as America's first female serial killer. This beautiful 20-something has tan skin and piercing green eyes, black hair, and a sinister gaze. Seeking revenge upon the descendants of her persecutors, she scratches men.
I just felt a burning sensation, and I looked down, and I turned on my flashlight, and I see there's 2 scratch marks on my knee.
I sat in the white chair right by the window, and then I felt a burning sensation on my back, and that was there. It's kind of like a sunburn, like when you get slapped.
I had scratching on my left arm and then scratching on my right arm, and it actually was probably 20 minutes ago, and it still burns. It was almost like an ice cube going down it, but you know how ice can burn you?
Yeah.
That's what it felt like.
If you listen to the local tour guides, you'll hear them speaking of a wicked woman who would seduce and poison unsuspecting travelers, then store their hacked-up carcasses in a rotting root cellar. They say she has the ear of the devil himself. Banished banshee in white wedding dress. Messenger for the devil. North Carolina, 1809. In a remote, flowery meadow by a burbling creek, a teenage couple lazily lays together in the shade of a massive willow tree. The young man, John, is handsome and carefree, clutching the delicate hand of his mulatto princess. The two lovers notice a cardinal flutter to the ground nearby, cocking its head curiously. John Fisher reflects on the first time he laid eyes on Lavinia. She was enslaved, having been purchased by his uncle, George. John himself became enslaved by her beauty. He was hesitant to make his interest known, and far from coercion or force, he attempted to win her affections through gentlemanly romance. Lavinia came to like John, who was both kind and protective toward her, seeking a way to negotiate her freedom. Eventually, she came to love the man. Uncle George, however, was having none of it. In 1810, he sold Lavinia to Dr. Joseph Glover in Charleston, South Carolina. The idea was to create enough distance between the two lovers that John would eventually forget about Lavinia and marry a proper white girl. The uncle's plan was undermined when John moved to Charleston and was eventually able to secure Lavinia for himself. John's father was owed a great deal of money by a local family, the Haywards, who owned a large plot of land in North Charleston. On this land were two taverns, the 5 Mile House and the 6 Mile House, both heavily frequented by travelers. 5 Mile House was overseen by William Hayward, son of the owner, and the management of 6 Mile House fell upon John and Lavinia, who made the tavern their home. These 20-somethings made genuine friends there, although many of these friends were rough around the edges, some holding criminal records. In those years, Charleston was well known for political corruption and perversion of justice, and so hostility toward the law was not uncommon. A close friend of the couple, Joseph Roberts, had previously suffered the penal consequence for theft. The punishment was called cropping, the authorities using a rusty blade to slice off part of your face, in this case, Joseph's ear. This was colonial law, and although the Bill of Rights had been passed on a federal level, it would take decades before Charleston followed suit. Another friend of the Fishers had formerly committed manslaughter, the unintentional killing of another, and for that crime was branded with a cattle brand, the red scar of an M now permanently singed into his palm. These punishments were mild when compared with the terrible fate of spending any amount of time locked in the city jail, which at that time was quite new. Inside this horrific facility, men, women, children, and the insane were held together, often 7 or 8 grouped together in large cages. Disease, bug infestation, fights, torture, and assault were everyday occurrences there. The jail had no plumbing, no running water. Rainwater from the roof was sometimes utilized, but would quickly run out. If you entered the jail pregnant, you gave birth there, and your baby would potentially spend years in that cesspool. Imagine giving birth in a jail with no running water available. If a single mother was arrested, her children would be locked up with her and put to work. Next to the jail was the Sugar House, a building specifically used for the torture and sometimes live burning of disobedient slaves. The Sugar House has been torn down, as some bits of history are so vile, the powers that be would prefer to sweep them under the rug. To understand the truth of John and Lavinia Fisher, some background is necessary. In 1819, Charleston was in a financial depression and the public was desperate for basic resources. Career politicians, afraid of losing their livelihood, were under pressure to revive the local economy before the next election cycle. Crime was rampant and merchants were avoiding Charleston altogether due to reports of highway robbery, which was a capital offense at that time. Sheriff Colonel Nathaniel Green Cleary, up for re-election and deeply in financial debt, was under the gun to lay down the law, especially on the trade routes in North Charleston. With a visit from U.S. President James Monroe just a few months away, the despised governor, John Geeds, implored the sheriff to deter criminal activity by any means necessary. Governor Geeds was the worst kind of politician. A few years earlier, he had challenged his election rival to a flintlock pistol duel, then proceeded to have his own son do the shooting for him. His son killed that political rival, securing the election for Geeds, but was shot dead in the process. On February 16, 1819, it was after sunset at the 5 Mile House. William Hayward, the owner's son, was inside the tavern pouring whiskey for some guests as they finished a game of cribbage. He heard a large commotion outside and, stepping onto the porch, saw a mob of armed men approaching the tavern, some on horseback, some carrying lit torches. The leader, a handkerchief-masked man on a quarter horse, raised his voice. "This tavern is currently housing known criminals. Under Lynch's law, you have 15 minutes to vacate. Do you yield?" William Hayward retreated into the tavern, retrieving a loaded musket and explaining the situation to the startled guests. Time ticked by. Hayward checked his stopwatch nervously. 15 minutes. A torch came spiraling through one of the windows. Another torch burst in, and then another. One of these torches hit the cribbage table, exploding spilt whiskey and causing one of the players to catch fire. This burning wretch rolled on the ground wildly as the others fled out the back door. Retreating into the woods, William Hayward listened to the burning man's screams as the building exploded in an alcohol-fueled inferno. Hayward ran to the 6 Mile house to warn the Fishers. Seeing the bright light of the burning 5 Mile house and hearing the distant hoots and hollers of the lynch mob, they fled with William. Hours passed. John, Lavinia, and William returned to 6 Mile house cautiously. The tavern was still standing. Loaded flintlock pistols in hand, they carefully opened the back door and slipped inside. Next to the fireplace, a man from the lynch mob, David Ross, was sitting in a rocking chair, smoking a fresh pipe and helping himself to some spirits. He had been placed at the site as a lookout. Hayward recognized the man, grabbed him by the collar, and cursed him before pushing him out the front door. Breathing heavily, William turned back to look at John and Lavinia. What are we gonna do now? It wasn't 10 seconds before David Ross calmly walked back up onto the porch. "Excuse me, I need to retrieve my belongings." His satchel was resting on the floor next to the fireplace. What ensued next was a true beatdown. The three gave David Ross a whooping, which involved Lavinia, allegedly, smashing David Ross' head through a window. William Hayward grabbed a loaded whip, John Fisher held him down, and William whipped him as though he were a disobedient schoolboy. Ross wailed and hollered, then squirmed free, leapt off of the porch, and ran away toward Charleston, likely to report back to his lynch mob superiors. Lavinia chased after him, screaming,
"You damned infernal rascal! If I ever catch you again, I'll give you 100 lashes!"
By Ross's own admission, the trio did not attempt to murder Ross and did not threaten to murder him. A few hours passed. It was late, and the three friends now waited with loaded weapons. John heard the stirring of a horse outside. Signaling to William, they readied their muskets before unbarring the front door, opening it, and fixing muskets on the intruder. A stranger was standing on their property, his horse lapping water from the trough. Lavinia stepped out slowly. Fixing a loaded pistol on the man, she began the interrogation.
"Name?"
she asked. John Peoples, he trembled. I'll just be on my way."
"Grab him."
John and William grabbed Peoples. Again, no killing or threat of killing, as Peoples was permitted to flee. A few hours passed. John and William were dozing off, but Lavinia was watching the road closely. She saw flickering dots of light moving in from the distance. The lynch mob had reassembled and was returning. The leader of the mob was now unmasked, and now he had a badge. "This is Sheriff Nathaniel Cleary. You are under arrest for assault with the attempt to murder. Come out now or your lives will be forfeit." The Fishers could now see more clearly what was transpiring. This was a setup, a frame job, likely concocted to clear out both 5 Mile and 6 Mile house. That land had been disputed for quite some time, and although John and Lavinia had lived there for 5 years, they were not the proper owners. Now, they would become the fall guys. With the tavern surrounded, resistance was futile, especially with the sheriff involved. All inside surrendered with hands up, and John and Lavinia were immediately restrained. William Hayward was from a rich family and so was allowed to go. Pedigree and wealth came with an abundance of privileges, then as it is now. Sheriff Cleary studied the house for a moment. David Ross came out of the tavern with his satchel, and Sheriff Cleary handed him a lit torch. "Burn it." John and Lavinia watched as the smiling David Ross threw the lit torch into the tavern. Lavinia screamed in despair, the young couple gazing in shock as their life and freedom went up in flame.